Can you talk a little bit more about your scientific approach to social?
Yeah, and I first want to say that with social or anything business related, I'm a firm believer there's not one way of doing things. As you mentioned, Gary has a very different approach than I have. I admire Gary greatly. I've spoken on stage with him, and I just have a different philosophy and a different approach. And I never say this is a right way or a wrong way. And I'm sure you've also seen from the book, it's not just me. I went off and interviewed my top friends and partners, and some of them contradict each other in terms of their approach in the book. But I wanted to do that to provide a well-rounded strategy and landscape of what people are doing to be successful, and then you determine what is the right fit for you. Because my approach may not be the right fit for somebody, and Gary's approach may be better, or my approach may be better than Gary's approach for certain people and certain businesses. So I always like to point that out because I can't stand people in the marketplace that are gurus or experts to say this is the only way to do something, because it's never that case. It's just like, here's the information, this is what I've learned, this is where we've had success, and here's where other people have had success. Now you make the determination what path is best for you. And I think that's critically important from a mindset perspective to kind of set yourself up for long-term success. But as you mentioned, my approach is very scientific in terms of really testing and learning. And you started off the podcast talking about reading and learning. And I think it was your father or your grandfather that read every book. To me, like the way that I learn is I don't read a lot of books. Like that's not the way that I learn. The way that I learn is by experimenting and by actually experiencing what it's like to do something, which it's just the way that I can read a book and glean high level information, but until I do it, I don't really understand it. That's the way my mind works. So that's where the experimentation really works for me to understand what happens when you put a piece of content out to a specific audience, when you format it, when you share a specific story, a theme, a structure like that. Because the world that we live in today with social media and especially the social advertising platforms, you can be your own market research firm. And you can do it for less than like $10. You can go and test stuff. We live in a time that's unprecedented. So for me, and I put it in the book, is just a very simple 3-step process: hypothesis, test, pivot. So, and that's a very scientific method approach. It's you set a hypothesis. What do I think is going to work? Then I create a low-cost proof of concept that represents that hypothesis. I test it and validate whether or not my hypothesis held true. If it didn't, I start the process over again. Because the biggest thing with social media in any aspect of business is you actually have to learn. It's like people will just keep doing the same thing over and over again and just expect something to go viral. And that's one of the challenges I see with Gary's model, not for him and his team, because his team is very analytically driven and they're very smart. But the message of just more, most people will just take that at face value and just keep pushing more and more content across all these platforms, but they're not learning. Right. They're posting and not learning. Why isn't this working? Why is this working? And that's the most important, critical part of being successful, because I will say that I'm definitely not the smartest person out there, not a rocket scientist, but I just out-test everybody. And I don't stop until I find the right answer. And it still holds true today. I've been in the digital space for 15 years, and we're wrong more times than we're right. But we know that we're learning from what's not working, and we keep pushing forward.